So lovely to meet everybody. Really great to hear your introductions. Just a brief sort of overview of what you can expect from Now Teach and our partnership with CTSN. So hopefully you're already aware that we're a supportive network of career changers, and we work really closely with Angela and colleagues at CTSN to supplement the training and in-school support that you get. We provide support during this training year alongside CTSN and your schools, but we also continue that beyond as well. For as long as you remain in the classroom, you'll have access to all of our events for free. They're all optional and in the evening and run by some really brilliant experts in education. The sorts of support that you can expect to see shooting into your email inbox from me is some events, which is obviously open to all the cohort. Our first is on the 24th, so Saturday in July. We've got a really brilliant lineup of speakers. We've got a behaviour panel run by Now Teachers who've got experience teaching, where you can ask them all the questions that you'd like to ask before starting in September. We run the evening events, which are all online, and we're going to keep them online for now, so you can access those with everybody nationally who's a career changer with Now Teach. But we're also hoping to be able to come back to offering termly in-person events. We found that it worked quite nicely in small groups when we did this pre-COVID. So we did some sort of groups in Cambridge, Ipswich and Norwich as well. So you can meet people in the local area, obviously training with CTSN, but with others as well. We've got online career changer content on our welcome hubs. There's lots of information on there that I've sent you the links to that you're more than welcome to have a look through and ask me any questions about. And as and when you start working your way through the year and challenges and successes come through, we always love to hear those. We love to sort of share the successes within the cohort, but also if there's particular support that you benefit from, we'd always say have a conversation with CTSN and your mentor and your tutors, and we're always there to offer additional coaching support with a trained wellbeing coach and also careers support as well. Other individual support that we've provided has been IT support, voice coaching, support with NQT applications, but it very much depends on what you need and when, and through joined up conversation with us. On the Welcome Hub I mentioned, there's lots of information specific to career changes about the sorts of skills and experience you can bring to the classroom and to the young people that you'll be teaching. There's particular information on there around perfectionism, because we know that sometimes career changers do find that challenging, that you absolutely want every lesson to be perfect, and sort of finding your feet and working out what's good enough can be quite challenging. So there's resources on there that can help you navigate that. Alongside time management, there's a quote on there from Nick where he sort of found that moving from a previous career where he had lots of ownership over his time and then coming into immovable lessons, and when that bell rang he had to change, that was quite a challenge and quite a difference for him. So part of what we can do is link you up with other cohort members, other career changers who had similar challenges, and you can sort of share experience, advice, and similarly around school culture and relationships, it can be quite different to how you've worked previously, and we're here to support with that, navigating that change. So I'm going to hand over to Angela, who's going to share a little bit more information with you. I will stop screen sharing and Angela can start. There we go. Thank you.
Okay, so I think this is a good opportunity. Please feel free to ask questions as we go through, because a lot of this we will have looked at in induction, but it's really, I suppose, thinking about it with a career changes hat on, and also to give you an opportunity where perhaps you hadn't managed to digest it, or you had questions that you didn't feel you wanted to ask in that big forum when you feel quite overloaded sometimes with all that information. So it's about taking stock and thinking back to that. Now, just before we start, I just wanted to pick up on that last point about schools and the culture. Schools are really interesting places, and they are quite hierarchical. And whether that's good or bad, it is a debate that we could have. But the reality is that is what they are like. And at every level, there is someone you report up to and into, and that is very tightly controlled. And it would not be appropriate, even for me as an assistant head teacher on a senior team, to wander into the head's office without an appointment. Now, in other organisations, that often isn't like that, and the structures are very different, and it might be that career changes, find that quite difficult to understand or adapt to. And in the past, people make mistakes, not because they, are deliberately trying to, but because they perhaps haven't understood the hierarchical nature that some of our schools work in. So there is that to be aware of and ask questions about, I would say, in your first few weeks, about who's who and what happens if you've got a problem, who do you go to, what's the processes for that. And I would say, what's the expectations around communication? So, if you've got a mentor who's mentoring you, when do they want you to ask questions? Do they want you to store them up? Are they happy for you to email them? Are there parameters around how many emails they can cope with in a day and at what time those emails can come in? If you're like me, sometimes I choose to work late at night, and that's fine, but it doesn't mean that I expect people to respond to me. So it is worth, when you meet your mentor, because obviously if you've had a career where actually everybody worked in the evening and everybody shared emails with each other and that was the culture of your workplace, and then you work in schools where your mentor does not want that, very quickly you can kind of be at odds with each other. So I think my advice around schools is to assume that you're the novice, because that's always the best place to start, isn't it? And very quickly you can become the expert as you go through. But if you always assume you're the novice and you have to ask those questions, I think that's the best way, rather than going in with the assumption that you perhaps know better, because that can make relationships in schools quite difficult. So that's my advice. And I'm sure you're going to do this anyway. I'm probably teaching you to suck eggs, and I apologise for that. But in the past, people sometimes get that wrong, and that's just kind of a word of warning. And then discuss the parameters by which communication is going to take place with your mentor, perhaps with your senior tutor. What is acceptable, what from you, what would you like, and what would they like, and how are you going to make that work? So I think that's a really good place to start in that first mentor meeting. So I think it's worth us just coming back to the fact that you must be aware that there is a core content that you have to be taught, and that core content is coming from the DFE, and it builds on a pathway that takes you through your whole career, all the way up to executive headship if you choose to go that far. So we are here at the start of this journey with something called the ITT Core Content Framework, and our curriculum at CTSN goes beyond that. So I would say this is the bare minimum that a trainee teacher needs to be taught, and what CTSN are doing, and an example of this is today, working with Now Teach and offering you extras in order to make sure that you're well looked after, and that there are resources that are bespoke to your particular needs as career changers. Some of our curriculum goes way beyond what is suggested in the ITT core content, but your entitlement is that you should get what's in that core content and beyond. And that's the same for the early career framework. There's an entitlement that you should get that, and actually lots of schools in our partnership do way more than that for their early career teachers. But it's just important, I think, that you know that, and you know that there's a direction of travel which is perhaps slightly more controlled than in previous years. This curriculum wasn't around before. Lots of providers did their own thing, and they had their own unique curriculums, and then they're inspected by Ofsted on the merits of their curriculum. Now everyone is going to be inspected to ensure that they're delivering the core content and beyond. So it is slightly different, and I think from your perspective that's a good thing, because you know what your entitlement is and you can ensure that you're getting it. And I can say for definite that you will get it with CTSN. So I think you're in a really good and positive place, and actually you'll get a bit of extra support through Now Teach as well, which is like an extra bonus in relation to support with the core content framework. The other thing that's rumbling along side that is the teacher recruitment and retention strategy, which is about workload. And for those of you who've got partners who are teachers, I'm sure you're aware that at times this year that's been challenging for teachers. And at CTSN we are constantly working, and as was on the slide there with Now Teach, to support people to understand how to manage their workload effectively, to be time efficient, to give a task the time that you have got, rather than giving the task the time that you would like it to have. And I think that that's a reality in a teacher's life, one that can be a challenge for trainees initially, but with support and with expert guidance about how to do that, you will find it's much easier to move on with. So for the
Angela, could I just on that second piece, is that is that new as well, or has that been going on for a number of years?
A number of years, yeah.
It's still built in.
Yeah, what's new probably is the ITT's the market's response to that. So the teacher training market's response to that is a constant and evolving thing. And obviously we also have a duty to the people who we're working with as well. So our mentors and our senior tutors, we have to manage expectations of trainees to ensure that the workload for the people who are working with them is also achievable. So it's not a new piece of work. There's some really good top tips for organisations like schools and like ourselves, but there's also some practical things in there that you can take away as well. And what we would do on the course is work with you in relation to particular things that trainees find difficult on lesson planning, taking too long, needing strategies for managing marking so that it's more efficient, perhaps less personal, but doable in the time that you've got. And also working with you on how you are using your, in inverted commas, free slots in schools, your after school, before school time, and the times when you are not perhaps observing lessons or teaching. And I think sometimes people just aren't efficient enough with those slots. And so what they end up doing is taking work home. So it's all about trying to manage that and work with you, but it's definitely not a new thing. Okay, so our values, just so that we are all clear, we do expect our trainees to be research engaged. That's a big push from our partnership that perhaps is coming from our schools. So our schools within our partnership expect their teachers to be engaged in and with research. So they want you to know what's going on in relationship to your subject and be involved with your subject associations and be up to date with teaching and learning developments. But they also often ask you to be involved in research. And we've got lots of teachers in our partnership who take part in action research with people like the Chartered College, and with people like the Education Endowment Foundation. And obviously you'll all be taking part in research because you'll all be doing your PGCE with Anglia Ruskin, and that's an example of that. Now, the advantage to CTSN, I think, is that it is a school-based training programme and everybody who runs it and comes to talk to you are teachers in the schools that you are working in. So, they are senior teachers or they are teachers leading particular strands of the curriculum, if you like, that you need to know about. And so they are coming at it from a practically focused way. So yes, they'll draw on the research and yes, they'll give you the kind of big picture stuff, but they are on the ground doing it and can talk you through some of the challenges of that and some of the joys of that as well. And I think that's a real strength of our partnership. Equally, I'm a teacher in a school, Verity, who's going to be talking to most of you, all of us understand the latest developments in school as well, so we can be really up to date because we've not been in, we are in schools now, we are doing it. I am COVID testing with a stick as we speak and kind of sending people home, so we understand the challenges, and I think that's a real strength, because when you come to us with a challenge, we've got solutions for you because we're living it and breathing it too with you. We have action steps, which we'll talk about in a second. So each week you are given 2 action steps to work on. One is a curriculum action step, which is to do with what you've been taught that week. And one is a subject action step, which is just basically making sure that you are constantly developing your subject knowledge. Because obviously people tend to I find, get sucked into the lesson planning and go, oh my goodness, I'm teaching year 8, what shall I plan them? And they forget that actually they will have gaps in their knowledge, especially if perhaps you did your degree a long time ago and the curriculum perhaps has got things on it that you don't recognise. And you do need to be a step ahead of the children. So you need to be thinking, okay, I might be teaching that in a term. That's not something as a topic I've come across or have much knowledge of. So I've got to learn it ahead of the children. So it's making sure that those subject action steps are forced almost each week so that you don't just fall into the trap of only working on what you're teaching and forget that you're developing as well, and that you need to make time for that development. We have tried, excuse me, sorry, we've tried really hard to progressively sequence the curriculum so that you are meeting things at an appropriate time. So I would not ask you now, for example, to be able to plan a sequence of lessons because you haven't planned a lesson yet. I wouldn't ask you to deal with very challenging behaviour and apply some de-escalation techniques with a student who is, really, really challenging because you haven't learned how to just manage normal behaviour yet. So there are some things that you have to meet when you need to meet it, when you've got a bit more experience in the classroom. And so I think there's two parts to the course. There's knowledge that we give you, then there's experience that comes through the action steps, and then that knowledge builds and develops over time, hopefully to get you ready to be a teacher by the end of the course, where you can do that independently. So obviously, as well as it being progressively sequenced, the ownership shifts from doing it with another teacher, team teaching alongside another teacher, someone really holding your hand with the planning, to you doing it by yourself with someone just in the room perhaps, and stepping back and relinquishing, you know, a bit of control over to you. So that's the idea. We have always said it's quality, not quantity. So we offer some milestones of what we expect, but we don't necessarily stick to those like glue. So where we feel somebody needs to stop and re-understand planning, we might reduce their milestones a bit and say, don't teach as much for the next couple of weeks. We need to go back to basics because we've not got it right. So we'd rather it was right than you kind of race ahead and teach, you know, 20 periods not very well, because that's no good for you, it's no good for the children that you're teaching. So in summary, we've got the different routes. So some of you will be on the part-time route, some of you will be on the non-salaried route. We've got the PGCE, you've got your core training with me on a Friday. Now, sometimes that will be with me and sometimes it will be with an expert. So for example, in special educational needs. And then you've got your subject afternoons with your subject specialists and some subject conference days as well that are dotted throughout the programme. And of course, the subject days, afternoons and days, link up with what's being taught in the curriculum. So if you imagine I'm teaching you, let's say, assessment for learning in the morning, and I'll give you the big picture of assessment for learning. I'll tell you who the key players are, like Dylan Williams. We'll have a look at the theory. But then in the afternoon, your subject link will say, okay, so what does assessment for learning look like at Key Stage 3 in science? What kind of things do we do to assess in science? What might be a good way of capturing an experiment and a write-up of an experiment, and how might we go about creating a matrix for assessing that, or creating some success criteria for it? So they will look at assessment for learning through the lens of the subject. They will demonstrate it for you and they'll exemplify it. That's the idea of those afternoons. And they will also be constantly talking to you about your subject knowledge and giving you advice to help you improve. So we've got a weekly curriculum plan, which tells you what you have to do each week for the school, you know, from core training into school-based training. And then we've got a weekly reflection and those 2 action steps that I discussed before. Now, there are lots of different people who are looking after you. And initially, I always think this is the bit that's really confusing, because who is who and who do you go to for what? So I do think it's worth us just spending a little bit of time here and just making sure everyone is clear. So you will have me, I am the hub lead for Cambridge, or Laura King Fulberry. Then you will have a senior tutor. So they are someone who belongs to the skit, who will look after a group of you. So a bit like we're talking now, 6 of you, and regularly meet you and track your progress. And I think your senior tutor is your most important friend. So if you've got any doubts, concerns, maybe things in school, you're finding it difficult to understand, or you've got off on the wrong foot with your mentor and you're not sure how to unpick it, or you'd like to raise something but it's sensitive and you're not sure how best to raise it, talk it through with your senior tutor, because they are your champion, if you like. And they can say, okay, leave that with me, I will deal with it, I'll pick it up with the school, or actually this is something that you should deal with, but do it in this way. And they can give you advice about how to deal with sometimes sensitive issues. If your mentor perhaps is, you know, has missed a couple of meetings and you want to catch them up, but you know that they've been under, you know, personal pressure, you know, just some of those quite difficult things that happen with personnel issues in school. Your senior tutor is always, I think, the first person to go to just talk through how to best to approach that. Your subject link I've already talked about. You'll have a PGCE tutor who will literally be there to support you through the PGCE. So that's a very bespoke piece of work, who will, you know, check your PGCE assignments, they'll give you advice, they'll talk you through your rationale and your data collection. And then you'll have obviously the people in school who are your school-based mentor and your school-based professional tutor. Now, your school-based professional tutor is someone who is normally a senior leader. So they're normally an assistant head level, and they look after all of the early career teachers and training generally in the school. So it would be somebody like me who's an assistant head who looks after mentoring for both initial teacher trainees, but also perhaps early career teachers as well. So they're not going to have lots to do with you on a day-to-day basis. Their job is to quality assure what's going on in schools, and their job is to make sure that you are well looked after. So if you had a bit of an issue with a mentor, your professional tutor is someone you could talk to because they're dispassionate about it and separated from it. Equally, if perhaps you were struggling and it was deemed that we might need to put a bit of support in place for you, that's when the professional tutor might step in and give your mentor a bit of support. But your mentor will be the key person. Sorry, Jim, go for it.
No, sorry, Angela. Just a quick question. I mean, you obviously occupy a lot of time for the mentor. I mean, do they have, what's their attitudes? I mean, do they have a choice over being a mentor? Are you like the last thing they want when they come back on September?
No, I mean, in our partnership, most mentors have chosen to be a mentor. There are some caveats to that because obviously there'll be a school policy in most of our schools because we are committed to training that say that every department needs to provide perhaps an ITT mentor and an early career mentor, you know, so that there's most people have a department discussion and people tend to be asked if they would mind doing it, and then those people who are happy to do it and who believe in mentoring put themselves forward. In my experience, Jim, mentors on the whole give way and above the time that they get, and the reason they do that is because they care and they want to do a good job. And actually these people are teachers, they want to help people, and of course in their eyes you're one of their pupils in a sense, aren't you, and they're trying to help you get the best you can out of it. So they're really willing and giving of their time way beyond the time they actually get.
Yeah.
And obviously, you know, we'd love to be able to give them more, but it is what it is, isn't it, in terms of what schools can release and funding. Different schools have slightly different arrangements to how mentoring is organised. So in some schools in our partnership, mentors are given the time and it's protected on their timetable for them to meet you once a week. Some schools give mentors extra additional pay for taking on the role of a mentor, and your mentor meetings might be after school. So there's different kind of ways of dealing with it in different schools depending on their context. But I would say most of them have chosen to be there and are willing to give way beyond what would be expected.
All right, great, thanks.
But if there's any issues with a mentor, that's why these other structures are in place to be able to pick that up.
Cool.
We've talked about the evidence bundles, and I'll come back to that in a second. So our curriculum has those 8 strands. That's the key bit for you to get your head around, because everything comes from those strands to a certain extent. And if you can demonstrate evidence of meeting those strands in each term, then you are showing you are making progress. The only thing I would say about these strands is that actually in a curriculum strand, it doesn't necessarily follow that you have to go, so that the grading that you get on your reports are things like novice, competent, expert, just so we can get a sense of where you are on each curriculum strand and which are your priority areas to focus on. But it isn't linear because the curriculum changes. So it's quite possible to stay at novice for all 3 terms in your reports because the curriculum is getting progressively harder. Does that make sense? So if you think about behaviour for learning, at the beginning, all we're really asking you to do is know the school policy, to be able to get students in, to be able to get them on, to be able to deal with low-level disruption and plan ahead for it, maybe scripting what you might say. By the time we get to term 3, we're expecting you to preempt that behaviour, we're expecting you to de-escalate it, we're expecting you to plan activities that are going to stop poor behaviour. That's much more difficult. So therefore, it is possible to be making progress, but it might not necessarily appear linear on a report. So please don't panic about that. We know that, we're aware of it. It's just the reason for the grading on the report is not that you're graded at the end of the course, because you're not. You pass the course or you don't. It is literally for you to be able to see which of the strands you need to work on a bit more. So it's a diagnostic tool for you and the people working with you to say, actually, you're brilliant at this, but this strand you haven't had that much experience of, and we probably need to prioritise that and make sure we give you a class with quite a few SEND students in, so you can get a bit more experience with those students. So it's a diagnostic process. So this is your friend over the summer, I'd say. In the handbook, go to the strands and have a good look at what's in those strands and get your head around just term 1. So don't worry about reading the whole lot, just go into each strand, so each of those 8 strands that we just looked at, and see what you're expected to be able to do and demonstrate in term 1, so that you know what people are looking for when they're coming to look at your lessons. And you can think about ensuring that you create yourself experiences in your schools that are going to meet that criteria. And so you can be having conversations with your mentor and say, look, I've got to make sure I am presenting myself as a teacher, and I'm not very good with my voice. Can I have some advice? You know, I tend to get a bit shrill and high pitched when I get cross with everyone, and I recognize that. Can I have some support with that? What's your advice? Can you practice it with me? That kind of thing. So starting to think about what is expected of you in term 1 is for me the best place to start with the handbook, because it can feel a bit unwieldy at first, which is why I'm trying to navigate which bits to look at for you. This also is your friend, and a lot of work, I can say blood, sweat and tears of mine have gone into these documents. You can see here that you've got the core content, so this is your entitlement, if you like, and we're proving it's there so that everyone knows it's there. But every week you're going to have to read something, observe something with an experienced teacher who's good at it, and do something to check that you've understood it. And even if you do it and it doesn't work out very well, and you evaluate that it was, you know, a bit of a dog's dinner, and next time you're going to do something else, you still have to try it out, I think, in schools to make it learn. Can you see the logic in that? Because reading it alone and learning it separately to doing it in teaching doesn't work, in my opinion. You've got to be able to put the whole thing together. And sometimes reading it and not being able to see it done well is quite difficult then to actually imagine what it looks like in a science lesson or in a maths lesson, where there are certain constraints around the way that that subject is taught, and we need to recognise that. So you'll see there's your reading. You're going to read, in this case, an article from the EF. There's your person to observe and what to focus on. Because I think it's really difficult when you first go into teacher training and they say, oh, go and watch Mr. So-and-so, he's brilliant. And you watch him and you think, yes, gosh, that was brilliant. But there's so many things that you could pick out on. It's overwhelming, because what's second nature to me to pick up on isn't second nature to you, because you don't have any mental model or any experience other than perhaps a little bit of experience of your own education, and perhaps like Jackie, because you've been in school doing bits of tutoring. So normally we tell you what to focus on. So in this case, you're looking at, you know, what feedback does the teacher give, and how do the students actually respond to that feedback? And in some cases they might not, and that's okay. And then maybe observe a lesson where the teacher is giving some peer or self-assessment, but he's really scaffolding that so that they're saying, you know, you're going to do this self-assessment now, but here are the rules by which you're going to do that self-assessment. How do we make sure that it's good and it's not just, yes, I'm going to give myself 10 because I'm great and I love myself? You know, it's, what's the scaffolding around that? And then you will respond to that. Then you will decide how good you feel about marking and assessing and giving feedback. And you'll set yourself a little action step, which is, let's imagine you're competent. You're going to provide examples of how you've experimented and reflected in ways in which you can use teacher feedback to make sure it's specific, clear, and that students act on it. So clearly, you're going to have to do something there, aren't you? You're going to have to teach a lesson with a little bit of feedback, and you're going to have to make sure that the students did something with that feedback. Now, that feedback could be verbal, as it might be in the middle of a science experiment, or it could be written in response to, you know, a maths question where they've obviously missed a step out and you want them to go back and look at that. And then you will provide at the end of that next meeting, so a week ahead, you will provide some evidence that you've done those things. So you might show an observation of the teacher to say, I've observed this teacher, here are my notes. You might show your lesson plan, and you will be doing a weekly reflection, and lots of the evidence that you use each week can come in with that weekly reflection. And then you've got your subject action step. So in reality, all of those things kind of pull together. Now, the other way that we try and help you learn is through instructional coaching. So we think sometimes it's a bit like driving, I think, teaching. I know how to do it, therefore I tell you how to do it, but you can't do it because you don't have the mental models or the built-in experience or the automatic responses to things that I have from my experience. And so I might find it hard to deconstruct that for you, and you might find it frustrating, a bit like I did when I was learning to drive, that you can't drill it down enough for me to understand what I have to do next. So one of the things that we've been working with our mentors to do is to really break that down into bite-sized pieces. So if, for example, you're not very good at stopping the children and making them wait and listen before you give the next instruction, and that's coming up regularly, we need to go right back to basics, isolate that thing, and give you stepped approaches to be able to do that. So here you will see we've got this action step approach, which through the walkthroughs, and I've told you which pages in this lovely blue book that you'll get, which literally give you step-by-step processes to, let's imagine, assessment. So I'll have picked out 3 little things to do with assessment, and you can go into those pages and say, oh, what do they suggest that I do? And then you can follow that really tight structure, which is designed for a novice, if you like, who perhaps isn't getting it right, and follow that rather than guessing what's in the experienced teacher's head, which I think sometimes is quite difficult to do. So that's the other bit of support that you've got there. And then, of course, this all gets pulled together in a weekly reflection.
Sorry, just on that last one, is there a way to get subject specific recommendations for the steps you can do? Because I guess for some lessons it's easy to implement, where others it's more difficult.
So the walkthroughs are more teaching pedagogy. So they're more about, assessment is assessment, and actually good self-assessment is good self-assessment. The principles, the structures are very similar in every subject, aren't they? The way in which it plays out becomes a bit more nuanced, and I agree. So I think that is your mentor who'd be giving you that. So remember, someone every time you teach is giving you some feedback, aren't they? And they will be saying, that was great assessment for learning when you were looking at the clay head, but you never thought about these 3 things which you should have done, and add that to your assessment for learning next time. So I think you would get that through your mentors and subject specialists feedback who are coming in. This is more about the basic nuts and bolts of the pedagogy of being a teacher. So it's to do with behavior. I mean, you can see on there, it's to do with behavior and relationships. Well, that's very similar, whatever your subject, actually, although there might be some nuances around how you set up a science experiment, for example. And in science, there might be some nuance about transitions, where actually the behavior can be really bad from transition from one thing to the next, and that needs some tight control in science, for example, which might be less relevant in maths. Curriculum planning, explaining and modelling, questioning and feedback, and then some of the cognitive science about how we remember and how we recall is really important as well. So that's a bit more generic, but it is written for the novice. So if somebody keeps saying to you, actually, your questioning just isn't good enough, and you're like, great, but how do I fix it? The expert sometimes might find that difficult, because to them it's easy, because they don't even think about it, they just do it. Whereas this book will support you to break down aspects of your questioning and work on it in a step-by-step process, which I think is really user-friendly. But your subject work will be given to you through your subject people who come out and observe you. And then that all comes together in this weekly reflection, where you are asked to reflect on what you've done with me on a Friday, the reading that you've been set for the week, what you did in school, and, like you say, what you might have done in your subject training or your own subject development that you've been working on as you go through the course. And so in answer to your question, John, this is where you would get the subject feedback, because let's imagine here that your mentor had said, right, I want you to work on the transitions between the science experiments and releasing them back to do the write-up, because that's the bit where it's going really wrong. Or I want you to work particularly on how you might teach a difficult concept in science and how you might break that down into bite-sized chunks, because it's quite difficult for students to grasp. When they watch you teach, they will be commenting on what they've asked you to work on. And if you're not doing it very well, then they'll be giving you some advice about how you can improve that. Does that make sense? So you'll have one of these observations per week, and then there's a general observation form, which is less focused on your targets and more for people who might be working with you who are not your mentor, perhaps other people in the department who you might be working with or sharing classes with. So in summary, it kind of looks a little bit like that, but the key to it is your subject mentor training, because the mentor is holding all these things together, and they're all happening separately somewhere, but they're all coming together through that weekly plan. Does that make sense? Because they'll be asking you questions about your weekly reflection, and you'll be showing it to them. They'll need to know what's been happening in core training. They'll want to look at your evidence, which you will have put onto OneNote. So the idea is that it all pulls together and into that mental meeting, which is electronic. So evidence from you, and trainees get themselves in hot water about what evidence have I got to collect. So I'm going to really simplify it for you. Just think about it like this. One bit of evidence to show that you've met your curriculum action steps. So let's imagine that's on feedback. You have taught a lesson on feedback, and you've observed someone on feedback. That's it, done, isn't it? There's your evidence. I've observed it, I've read a bit about it, and I have done my lesson. So here are my bits of evidence there. My subject is going to be clear. Perhaps I've gone to do some reading, perhaps I've read the specification for that particular unit. I might have gone and learnt, I might have gone on a science learning partnership course to make sure I'm ahead of that unit, whatever it might be that you've done in relation to that subject action step. Your weekly reflection, which is just one side of A4 that puts all those little bits together into one bit. And remember, we said the most important bit is what have you learnt, not what have you done. I'm not interested in the diary, that can just be bullet points. I want to know what you've learnt from that experience about behaviour for learning or assessment or your subject. And then your lesson observation, which will be done on you. You may do your own observations of others, but every week you will have a lesson observation formally of you to make sure that you are working towards those targets. So if you do that every week, that's totally doable. That's not an overwhelming bit of work. When it becomes overwhelming is if we let it stack up, and 5 weeks into it, your senior tutor says, oh, I'm going to have a look at your evidence. Let's have a look. And it's not there. Or every mentor meeting, your mentor's saying, right, well, I haven't seen that evidence. Where is it? And you say, oh, it's somewhere. It's on my laptop. I wrote it. I haven't quite written it up. I haven't typed it up. It's very easy to fall behind in something which is relatively simple. So my advice is be really strict with yourself and make sure that before every mentor meeting, you've got your evidence of that week, tick it off, sign it off. Don't spend hours on it, because this is about the learning. It's not about the quality of, the way it's written up, or it is literally your learning and your doing and your reflection on that doing. That's the key bit, isn't it? And to be able to discuss that with your mentor. So, this is what we want to see, is your learning being reflected through this evidence. And hopefully children progressing more in your classes as a result of you learning more, because you'll get better and they'll get better, and we should be able to see the correlation between the two. So I'll just bring us back to that. Go back to term 1, look at it carefully, ask questions if you want to. We're going to send you the weekly plans for just term 1. I thought the whole year might be a bit overwhelming, but we sent you just term 1, so you can see what you're doing each week right the way up until December. So you could get ahead on the reading if you wanted to. You could just look at what you're being asked to do and get your head around that structure. I'm hoping that the weekly plans make your mentor meeting really easy for you, because you can just say to your mentor, look, this is what we need to be doing this week. The only questions for people where it becomes a bit confusing, and Danielle, you'll need to work on this based on what we spoke to, is where you're not in every day, or you're part-time, or you're slightly, you've got a slightly different model. You've got to work out how your mentor meeting is going to fall and ensure that you've got enough time in school and in the classroom to be able to observe someone and teach that activity that they've asked you to do. So you will just need to talk to your mentor and senior tutor and come up with a plan for that to make sure it's manageable for you within those those part-time slots, wherever you just decide to put it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks, Angela. I think what you advised last week when we raised this, so just in case everyone's wondering what we're talking about, and my preference is to be in school for 3 days a week rather than 4. Is that something that I wait until September to agree that with my mentor and senior tutor?
I think in induction, then you've got your senior tutor. It's worth doing it with your senior tutor through the skit first.
Okay.
And then they, with you, will facilitate that conversation with the professional tutor, because they will know the curriculum better, because they've taught it, with their trainees over the last year or so. they can help the school work out how to do that.
Okay, and my 2 placement schools don't yet have an awareness of my preference for 3 days rather than 4?
Not that I know of, no. You could certainly email Sanya, Danielle, and say, just ask that question and just say, has anyone mentioned it to the school? Because Sanya might have done, but to my knowledge, they probably don't yet. All they know at the moment is who they've got. Now, they will be fine with it, but they will need a little bit of support and you will need a little bit of support to make your workload manageable and to ensure that you've got enough time in school to do those things. So that will just need a little bit of unpicking. And it's not a problem because schools are used to doing it because we have lots of trainees who are part-time. So, you know, we've done this before where we flex the curriculum, but it needs someone who understands it to be able to help think through what can be done when and how.
I was just going to say, Danielle, because I'm doing the same thing. So I'm going to have a Wednesday off each week. And how I've set it up with my school is that so everyone else will finish, you know, like when the year 11s go in June, but I'll actually carry on until the end of term. So until the end of July. And that means that I'll have made up all my, you know, days in school that I have to do. So I don't know if that's what you're doing.
That's my expectation when I've spoken to people at CTSN about the arrangement.
Yeah,
that
and
I
that's
think
fine.
lots of
You'll
now
have plenty
teachers
of
do.
time.
Yeah.
The danger, and I guess the same will be for you, Jackie, is just making sure that because you're only in for 3 days, that you and your mentor have thought about in those 3 days how you're going to make sure you've got the observe, read and do, and obviously the read you can do at home, but particularly the observe and do bit fits into those 3 days. So what are you teaching? Where is that going to fit? What's the best days for you to come in where there's the most teaching experience, for example, for you? Is there a meeting on one day and you'd like to be at that? So there's some logistics that have to happen around those 3 days.
Yeah, because it has to be up to the school, doesn't it?
I think so. It's a combination of the two, isn't it? You want to sit down and talk to them about your needs and the school's needs, and I think the senior tutor is the best person to facilitate that conversation, because it's not then you asking what you want, is it? That they can do it professionally alongside you and the school and come up with a good plan.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'll wait. I'll do as you say. I'll ask Sanya if the schools have been informed.
Yeah, I suspect the answer is no, and if it's no, that's fine.
And then if no, I wait till September. If yes, it might be worth just dropping an email to ahead of time to see what day would suit the school.
Yeah,
or do you
and
think
if you want, Sanya can help facilitate that.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? So all of the stuff should be sent through to you, so you can get.
I think one thing that would be interesting to know a bit more about, Angela, is lesson planning, and how much of it will be you'll be able to author your own lessons, I mean down the line a little bit obviously, versus how much will kind of be set for you.
Yeah, it's a really difficult question, and it kind of depends on the school, is the honest answer. So in some schools there's a very tight curriculum that is kind of drawn up, and the expectation is that you stick with that curriculum and you teach, but perhaps tweak your resources and the delivery of it to meet the needs of your class, but the curriculum is quite tight, in which case whether you're
does that mean here's a lesson in PowerPoint, take it and tweak it?
In some schools, yes, take it and adapt it. In some schools it would be that, and here's the resources and make it work for you know the particular students in your room. In other schools it will be much freer, and teachers will have much more autonomy to teach within perhaps a more broader scheme of work, and might be given some resources on a SharePoint, but can use those resources on a SharePoint how they wish to. And in some cases, it might depend on where the school is in their improvement journey as to the reasons why it might be like that or not like that. You know, if the school is outstanding and people really trust their teachers, they might not feel the need to have such a constrained curriculum. In other schools, we might be on a journey of improvement and we might want to impose something which we know is good and get people using it before we release up again. So in some, obviously there's differences in schools which you need to be aware of. From our perspective, we do ask you to plan, but we are more than happy for you to plan from pre-existing resources, PowerPoints and things that already exist. And I really urge you to do that, because that's the reality of the teacher. You will not have time to do everything from scratch and create beautiful resources from scratch and You know, so the more you can learn to beg, borrow and steal and make it work for your class, the better, really, because that's the reality of teaching, isn't it? Is that we all share resources, and we take those resources and make them appropriate to the way that we like to teach and the children in front of us who have particular needs.
Yeah, cool.
So there is a lesson plan, pro forma, Jim, that you have to work on, and it's quite detailed, and it talks you through and I don't make any apologies for that at first, because it talks you through the processes that you need to be thinking about when you're planning a lesson.
Yeah.
In term 2, when you start to teach a bit more and we think that you've got planning nailed, so we're happy with your planning and it's going in the right direction, the senior tutor can shift you onto a slightly simpler lesson plan form, which is a bit more big picture and has less detail, and it will be quicker for you to fill in. But we won't do that initially because we need to teach you how to plan first, and the form is a way in which we would teach you. And then once you get more established with that, you can move on to the kind of easier version, and perhaps you might start planning in PowerPoint or Smart File in maths. You know, you might have your own subject focused ways of doing that. But there is no expectation to create everything from scratch. In fact, quite the opposite, I would say try not to. Although occasionally you might want to just see if you can do it, and there might be something really exciting about that, to say, oh, you know, I'd really like to create a lesson on, or a couple of lessons on this because I'm really passionate about this topic. That's fine, but I wouldn't be doing it all the time. So your first job in school is, where are the resources and what have I got to play with? And to make sure you've got access to those, you know where they are, you understand the way that they're filed, because that can be confusing if you're a new member of the department. And that you know that you can use them and tweak them to your needs.
Yeah, and in something like geography, it'll generally be PowerPoint based, will it?
I would have thought so in most schools I've worked in, but you might find that in some departments they might not give you the PowerPoint. It might be literally big picture Word documents of the scheme of work with suggested lesson activities. Okay. And then you take those suggested lesson activities and go away and turn them into a plan. So it really depends on how far ahead the department are in kind of uniformly planning their curriculums.
Yeah. No, great, thanks.
Okay, I think that probably brings us to the end of our time. Sorry, we've gone slightly over, but
it's fine, don't worry, I've messaged.
Lots to cover, isn't there? Lots to get your sort of teeth stuck into and your head around, but good to start doing that at this point in the year, so you're ready for September. You've got our contact details, and what I'll do is I'll make sure I save this recording and download it, and I'll share it and send it around so that you can always watch it back if you want to sort of come back to it, revisit anything that Angela's shared. But yeah, we're here to support you. We're part of that rung in the support ladder, so please do ask if there's anything that you find challenging.
Yeah, and the same for once you start reading the handbook. If there are things in it that you think, oh, I'd just like to ask that, then, you know, and don't forget you've got induction for a whole week and a bit before you go into school. So there's all those opportunities to ask me questions during that induction week as well.
Perfect.
All right, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Nice to see you all.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.